Minutes before the wedding, someone secretly stole the bride's wheelchair, believing the most feared Mafia King in America would leave her at the altar. Instead, he carried her before hundreds of powerful witnesses, and in that single unforgettable moment, he exposed a betrayal so deep it pushed his own empire toward war. But no one realized. The greatest enemy was already inside his own family. The wheelchair disappeared less than 5 minutes before the wedding. No one screamed. No one dared ask who had taken it. Inside the Grand Moretti estate, where crystal chandeliers glittered above marble floors stained by decades of whispered secrets, dozens of powerful guests stood frozen in uneasy silence. Politicians, billionaires, judges, and America's most feared mafia captains exchanged nervous glances, pretending not to notice what had just happened. Because everyone knew exactly who had ordered it. The empty bridal corridor felt colder with every passing second. A terrified maid whispered that the wheelchair had been removed from Charlotte Hayes's suite. Another servant quietly confirmed it had vanished without a trace. No one volunteered to help. Fear ruled this mansion far more effectively than loyalty ever could. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the orchestra rehearsing inside the nearby church. Everyone understood the purpose behind the cruel act. Someone wanted the bride to crawl. Someone wanted the future queen of the Moretti Empire humiliated before hundreds of witnesses. Inside the locked bridal suite, Charlotte Hayes stared at the empty space where her wheelchair had stood only moments earlier. Her heart pounded so violently she could hear nothing else. She gripped the edge of her dressing table, trying to steady her trembling breath. The magnificent white wedding gown pooled around her like shattered snow, beautiful yet completely useless. She tried reaching for the nearby wall. Too far. The polished marble floor suddenly looked endless. Charlotte closed her eyes, refusing to cry. She had survived worse. Years earlier, when armed men attacked her family's countryside estate during a violent extortion attempt, Charlotte had thrown herself in front of her terrified younger sister. She had shielded the child from collapsing timber and flying debris after an explosion ripped through the house. Her sister walked away unharmed. Charlotte never walked again. Doctors called it permanent spinal trauma. Her family called it the greatest sacrifice they had ever witnessed. Charlotte simply accepted it. She never regretted protecting the only person she loved more than herself. But today felt different. Today someone wanted to destroy not her body, but her dignity. Outside the suite, frightened servants whispered among themselves. Should we tell the boss? No. What if he finds out? He always finds out. The whispers died instantly. Every servant knew one truth. Adrian Moretti missed nothing. At 34 years old, Adrian Moretti ruled the most powerful criminal empire in America with absolute control. Newspapers described him as a billionaire shipping magnate. Federal agencies called him untouchable. Rival syndicates called him the king. Within the underworld, his name was spoken only in whispers. He did not chase power. Power came to him. Entire mafia families obeyed his decisions before he ever raised his voice. His empire stretched across ports, banks, luxury hotels, private security companies, and hidden operations no government had successfully dismantled. He inspired fear without demanding it. Yet the decision that shocked the underworld had nothing to do with business. It was his choice of bride. Charlotte Hayes. The Hayes family had once been respected among America's oldest elite families, known for honor rather than wealth. But years of betrayal, failed investments, and ruthless enemies had left them financially broken. Every powerful mafia family expected Adrian to marry a princess from another syndicate. Instead, he chose Charlotte, a woman confined to a wheelchair. Many believed compassion had clouded the king's judgment. Others called it weakness. Several rival families quietly predicted that the Moretti Empire would eventually collapse beneath a queen who could not even stand beside her husband. No one voiced those opinions directly to Adrian. They valued breathing. But one woman refused to remain silent. Vivian Moretti, Adrian's aunt. Elegant, calculating, merciless. She believed the Moretti bloodline deserved perfection. To her, Charlotte represented embarrassment. A crippled queen would weaken the family's image. So while Adrian finalized security arrangements at the church, Vivian calmly summoned 2 trusted servants. Remove the wheelchair, she ordered with icy precision. If she cannot reach the altar. Her lips curled into a satisfied smile. There will be no wedding. The servants obeyed without question. Now the mansion itself seemed infected by panic. Security guards avoided eye contact. Housekeepers silently prayed. Even hardened captains felt unease spreading through the estate. If Adrian discovered someone had touched what was becoming his, No one wished to imagine the consequences. Inside the bridal suite, Charlotte pressed trembling fingers against the cold marble floor. She pulled herself forward only inches before pain shot through her motionless legs. Her breathing became shallow. Fear tightened around her chest. Not fear for herself. Fear that Adrian would believe she had abandoned him. Fear that she would destroy the future he had chosen despite every warning. Outside, church bells began to ring. The orchestra started playing. Guests slowly stood. Massive wooden doors opened. Everyone turned toward the entrance, expecting the bride. Instead, only empty silence greeted them. Charlotte Hayes was nowhere to be seen. The first person to notice the missing wheelchair was not a bodyguard. It was a maid. Emma Brooks had worked inside the Moretti estate for only 6 months, but she had already learned the most important rule of surviving beneath the king's roof. Keep your head down. Keep your mouth shut. Never involve yourself in family affairs. At 23, Emma needed the job more than she needed courage. Her father's medical bills had emptied every savings account her family possessed, and the generous salary offered by the Moretti household was the only reason her parents still had a home. She cleaned quietly. She spoke only when spoken to. She stayed invisible. Until today. While carrying fresh linens through the western hallway, Emma noticed 2 nervous servants wheeling something beneath a heavy velvet cloth toward an abandoned storage room. They moved far too quickly. Far too carefully. Their frightened whispers stopped the moment they saw her. "What are you hiding?" Emma asked softly. One servant immediately lowered his voice. "You didn't see anything." The other glanced over both shoulders before unlocking the storage room. The velvet cloth slipped. Emma's breath caught. Charlotte Hayes's wheelchair. Hidden behind old furniture and dusty paintings. Her pulse quickened. Who ordered this? Neither servant answered. Instead, one stepped forward, his face pale with fear. "Forget you ever saw it." "But Miss Charlotte." "Forget it," he whispered urgently. Lady Vivian gave the order. The words struck Emma like ice water. Lady Vivian. Everyone inside the mansion feared her elegant smile almost as much as Adrian's silence. Disobeying Vivian often meant immediate dismissal. Sometimes worse. Emma looked once more at the wheelchair. Then toward the bridal wing. Understanding spread through her chest like fire. This wasn't an accident. Charlotte had been trapped. On purpose. The servants surrounding her lowered their voices even further. "If you return that chair, Lady Vivian will destroy your life. Stay out of it. You cannot save her." Emma's fingers tightened around the wheelchair's polished handles. "No," she answered quietly. "But maybe I can help her." Without waiting for permission, she turned the chair around and hurried through the endless marble corridors. Every step felt dangerous. Every corner carried the possibility of being caught. Fear whispered inside her mind, urging her to stop. But another thought refused to leave. Charlotte had once sacrificed her own future to protect her younger sister. Surely someone could risk a job to protect Charlotte. Inside the bridal suite, Charlotte still sat alone on the cold marble floor. Her wedding dress had spread around her like fallen silk. Tiny crystals sewn into the fabric reflected sunlight streaming through the windows, making her appear almost regal despite her helpless position. She had managed to pull herself only a few feet before exhaustion forced her to stop. When the door quietly opened, she expected another humiliation. Instead, she saw a young maid pushing her missing wheelchair. Emma immediately dropped to one knee. "I'm so sorry, Miss Hayes." Charlotte looked at the chair. Then back at the trembling maid. "You shouldn't be here. They hid your wheelchair." "I know. They wanted to stop the wedding." "I know that too." Emma blinked in surprise. "You knew?" Charlotte offered a faint smile. The people who fear losing power usually become predictable. Emma's eyes filled with emotion. "You aren't angry?" "I am." Charlotte gently brushed invisible dust from the sleeve of her wedding gown. But anger clouds judgment. She slowly accepted Emma's help into the wheelchair without another word. Not once did she complain. Not once did she ask why anyone hated her enough to do this. Most of all, she refused to cry. Emma quietly adjusted the flowing veil across Charlotte's shoulders. "You don't have to be this strong." Charlotte looked toward the large mirror. Her reflection stared back with calm determination. "If I arrive broken," she whispered softly, "people will believe Adrian chose weakness." Her fingers rested lightly against the diamond engagement ring. "I won't allow anyone to think the king built his empire on pity." Emma felt tears threatening her own eyes. Charlotte was carrying humiliation with more grace than most people carried victory. For the first time since entering the Moretti estate, Emma understood why Adrian Moretti had chosen her above every wealthy, powerful daughter offered to him. Strength was not measured by standing. It was measured by refusing to surrender. Downstairs, inside the magnificent church, hundreds of guests sat beneath towering stained-glass windows. The orchestra continued playing. Priests exchanged uneasy glances. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. At the altar, Adrian Moretti stood perfectly still. His tailored black suit remained flawless. His expression remained unreadable. Yet those closest to him noticed the smallest change. His eyes. They had become dangerously still. Matteo, his trusted underboss, stepped closer. Boss. Adrian never looked away from the empty entrance. Something is wrong. The guests are beginning to whisper. I don't care about whispers. His voice remained calm. Too calm. I care about patterns. His sharp instincts had kept him alive through decades of betrayal. He recognized the feeling immediately. This delay wasn't caused by panic. It wasn't caused by fear. Someone inside his own house had interfered. Someone had crossed a line that belonged only to him. A heavy silence settled over the church. Even the musicians slowly stopped playing. Adrian finally lifted his eyes toward the massive wooden doors. Then, without asking permission, without offering explanation, the king stepped away from the altar. Gasps spread through the church. Guests watched in stunned silence as America's most feared mafia boss walked steadily down the center aisle. His destination was unmistakable. He was going back to the bridal suite. And everyone inside the Moretti estate suddenly realized the true danger had only just begun. The door to the bridal suite opened without warning. No one announced his arrival. No footsteps echoed through the hallway. Yet every servant inside the corridor instinctively lowered their heads. The king had come. Adrian Moretti stepped into the room with the quiet authority of a man who never needed to raise his voice. His dark eyes swept across the elegant bridal suite only once before stopping completely. Charlotte sat beside the window. Her wheelchair rested nearby, but the marks on the polished marble floor told a different story. Tiny scratches. The delicate imprint of her hands. Wrinkles in the long white train of her wedding gown. She had been on the floor. She had tried to reach the door alone. For a long moment, Adrian said absolutely nothing. He simply looked. Then his gaze drifted toward Emma Brooks, who stood trembling near the wall. The frightened maid lowered her eyes, expecting punishment. Instead, Adrian noticed the dust on her sleeves and the faint streaks across the wheelchair's polished wheels. Someone had hidden it. Someone else had brought it back. His mind needed only seconds to assemble the truth. This had never been an accident. It had been a calculated act of humiliation. Someone inside his own family had tried to break the woman he had chosen. The temperature inside the room seemed to drop. Even the guards outside the doorway stopped breathing. Charlotte looked up at him with remarkable calm. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Adrian remained silent. She lowered her eyes. "I made everyone wait." Silence. "I know today's ceremony is important to your empire." Still he said nothing. Charlotte forced a faint smile that carried more sadness than defeat. "I never wanted people to think your future queen was weak." Her voice remained steady despite the pain hidden beneath every word. "If you wish to end the engagement." She paused, swallowing the ache rising inside her throat. "I will understand." The room became impossibly still. Emma felt her own heart pounding against her ribs. Every servant expected Adrian to answer. Instead, the most feared mafia boss in America slowly removed his tailored suit jacket. He folded it carefully over the nearby chair. Then, without the slightest hesitation, he lowered himself onto one knee. Not before a queen crowned by tradition. Not before royalty. Before Charlotte Hayes. His future. Charlotte stared at him in stunned silence. "So that's what frightened you?" Adrian finally asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She blinked. "You believed my pride was greater than my promise." A single tear escaped before she could stop it. Adrian reached forward with extraordinary gentleness, brushing it away using the back of one finger. "I didn't choose you because you could walk." His eyes never left hers. "I chose you because, when everyone else ran from danger, you stayed to protect your sister." His voice remained calm. "You gave up your legs. But you never surrendered your courage." Charlotte's trembling breath caught. "In this house," Adrian continued quietly, "your strength is what wears the crown." Without another word, he slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as though he carried something infinitely more precious than power itself. Charlotte instinctively rested one hand against his shoulder. Her heartbeat echoed loudly in her ears. For the first time that morning, she felt completely safe. Adrian rose effortlessly, lifting her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing compared to the burden he willingly accepted. Without looking back, he walked toward the door. Emma hurried to move the wheelchair aside. Every servant lining the corridor stepped away immediately. Fear spread through the mansion like wildfire. No one dared speak. No one dared whisper. The king carried his future queen himself. Together they crossed the endless marble hallways. Crystal chandeliers reflected across Charlotte's white gown while Adrian's steady footsteps echoed through the silent estate. Word traveled ahead of them. Guests turned. Bodyguards straightened. Housekeepers froze. The church doors stood wide open. Inside, hundreds of the most powerful people in America waited in uneasy silence. Governors, federal judges, corporate billionaires, foreign diplomats, mafia leaders from every major family. Every eye turned toward the entrance. The orchestra stopped playing. The enormous wooden doors slowly opened. Adrian Moretti entered first. Not alone. Charlotte rested securely in his arms. No embarrassment remained upon her face. No shame. Only quiet dignity. A wave of stunned silence rolled across the church. Several politicians exchanged bewildered glances. Businessmen looked down awkwardly. Even rival mafia bosses lowered their eyes, instantly understanding what Adrian had just declared without speaking. She was not a burden. She was not an inconvenience. She belonged beside him. She was his. Near the front pew, Vivian Moretti felt every drop of color leave her face. This was impossible. She had expected panic. She had expected Adrian to protect his reputation. Instead, he had elevated Charlotte higher than any queen could have stood. Vivian finally understood. Her plan had not weakened Charlotte. It had strengthened Adrian's public loyalty beyond anything money or fear could buy. The entire empire had just witnessed the king choosing love over pride. Adrian reached the altar and gently lowered Charlotte into her restored wheelchair. He adjusted her veil with the same care another man might reserve for a priceless crown. Then he slowly turned toward the hundreds of silent guests. His face revealed nothing. His voice remained calm, which made it infinitely more terrifying. His dark eyes swept across every member of the Moretti household before he asked a single question. Who? The word echoed through the silent church. Dared touch my future queen's wheelchair? Not a single accusation was spoken after the ceremony. That frightened the Moretti family more than any outburst ever could. Adrian Moretti completed the wedding with the same calm expression he wore during billion-dollar negotiations and bloody syndicate conflicts. He smiled for the photographers. He greeted influential guests. He thanked politicians, judges, businessmen, and allied mafia leaders for attending. To everyone watching, the king appeared perfectly composed. Only those who truly knew him recognized the warning. When Adrian became silent, someone always paid the price. Late that evening, after the final guests departed, the enormous Moretti estate transformed into something entirely different. The celebration disappeared. In its place came absolute control. Every gate was locked. Every servant was accounted for. Every member of the security team surrendered their communication devices. No one entered. No one left. Without announcing it, Adrian had begun an investigation. Matteo, his most trusted underboss, converted the estate's private conference room into a command center. Computer monitors covered one wall, displaying security footage from every hallway, entrance, courtyard, and service corridor inside the mansion. Hour after hour, technicians searched through recordings. Every minute mattered. Finally, one camera revealed the truth. The footage showed two servants pushing Charlotte's wheelchair through the western hallway beneath a velvet cover. Minutes later, they unlocked an abandoned storage room and concealed it behind old furniture. Another camera showed Lady Vivian calmly walking away from the corridor less than 60 seconds earlier. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. The evidence spoke for itself. Matteo folded his arms. It wasn't random. Adrian watched the screen without blinking. No. It was planned. The investigation continued. Private phone records were quietly recovered. Financial transfers were traced. Encrypted messages hidden inside legitimate business communications began surfacing one after another. Each discovery painted a darker picture. Vivian Moretti had not acted alone. Several influential members of the Moretti bloodline had secretly opposed Adrian's decision to marry Charlotte Hayes. They believed the future queen should come from another powerful syndicate, creating stronger political alliances and expanding the family's influence. To them, Charlotte represented compassion. Compassion looked like weakness. Weakness invited rebellion. But ambition had pushed the conspiracy far beyond family disagreement. Encrypted conversations revealed regular contact between Vivian and representatives from rival mafia families. Their objective had never been simple humiliation. The wedding was only the beginning. If Charlotte appeared incapable before hundreds of powerful witnesses, Adrian's judgment would be questioned across the criminal underworld. Doubt would spread through the empire. Rivals would challenge his authority. Allies would reconsider their loyalty. The king would not lose his throne overnight. He would lose it one whisper at a time. Someone had attempted to fracture the empire from within. Meanwhile, Charlotte remained unaware of the investigation's full extent. The stress of the day, combined with exhaustion from dragging herself across the marble floor, had aggravated old spinal injuries. Adrian insisted she undergo a complete medical evaluation at the family's private hospital despite her quiet protests. She sat beside the window of her hospital suite, watching rain fall against the dark glass. When Adrian entered, she offered him a tired smile. "I'm sorry." He stopped walking. She looked down at her hands. "If I had never agreed to marry you, this wouldn't have happened. My presence divided your family." She swallowed hard. Maybe they were right. Silence filled the room. Then Adrian crossed the distance between them. He knelt beside her wheelchair once again, meeting her eyes. "You are not responsible for another person's betrayal." Charlotte looked away. "They hate me. They hate what they cannot control." His voice remained steady. "And they fear the woman I chose." She tried to argue, but Adrian gently placed his hand over hers. "No one," he said quietly, "will ever shame you again." For the first time that day, Charlotte believed him. Outside the room, another interview was already underway. Emma Brooks sat across from Mateo, her hands wrapped tightly around a warm cup of untouched tea. She repeated everything she had witnessed. The hidden wheelchair. The terrified servants. Lady Vivian's orders. The warnings to remain silent. She expected retaliation for speaking. Instead, Mateo carefully recorded every detail. When she finished, he nodded once. "You've shown loyalty." Emma frowned. "I only did what was right." "In this empire," Mateo replied, "those are not always the same thing." By midnight, disturbing reports arrived from across the city. 2 veteran bodyguards assigned to Adrian's inner security detail had vanished without explanation. A warehouse supervisor overseeing weapons shipments disappeared from the docks. Another longtime captain stopped answering encrypted communications. Some had fled. Others had likely been eliminated before they could speak. The conspiracy reached far deeper than anyone had imagined. Within hours, loyal soldiers quietly mobilized throughout the Moretti territories. Safe houses were activated. Armored convoys changed routes. Hidden arsenals were opened. No public declaration was made. No threats were issued. But every experienced member of the underworld recognized the unmistakable signs. The Moretti Empire was preparing for war. Long after midnight, the private hospital grew unnaturally quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Charlotte finally drifted into exhausted sleep. Outside her room, one assigned guard briefly stepped away after receiving what appeared to be an urgent security call. He never returned. A shadow emerged from the far end of the empty corridor. Dressed as a hospital orderly, the stranger pushed a supply cart toward Charlotte's room with calm, measured steps. The gloved hand beneath the white coat slowly reached inside a hidden compartment, and quietly wrapped around the grip of a suppressed pistol. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Moretti estate, but the mansion no longer carried the warmth of a newly celebrated wedding. Every hallway echoed with cautious footsteps and quiet whispers. The failed conspiracy had exposed cracks inside the empire that reached far deeper than anyone had imagined. Guards doubled their patrols, trusted captains watched one another carefully, and every conversation carried the weight of hidden danger. Yet amid the growing fear, one person refused to surrender to helplessness. Charlotte Hayes had survived betrayal before, and she refused to become another victim of it. Although doctors advised complete rest after the previous day's ordeal, Charlotte spent little time thinking about her own pain. Sitting inside Adrian's private office, surrounded by financial reports, shipping records and investment files, she quietly studied the numbers spread across the massive mahogany desk. Adrian watched her without interrupting. He had learned something important about his wife. Whenever Charlotte became completely silent, her mind was assembling pieces that others failed to notice. She did not search for enemies through weapons or threats. She searched for patterns. Years before tragedy confined her to a wheelchair, Charlotte had built an exceptional reputation as a financial strategist. Before her family's fortune collapsed, she had advised investment firms, rescued struggling companies from bankruptcy, and uncovered complex fraud schemes hidden beneath perfectly balanced financial statements. Very few people inside the Moretti empire knew that side of her life because no one had ever cared to ask. They had looked only at the wheelchair and assumed weakness. They had underestimated the sharpest weapon she possessed, her intelligence. Charlotte slowly turned another page before looking toward Adrian. "Your enemies aren't stealing from your empire through cash shipments," she said calmly. "They're moving money through legitimate businesses." Adrian remained silent, encouraging her to continue. She pointed toward several shipping invoices. "These companies appear profitable, but their profits don't match the volume moving through your ports. Someone created false contracts to hide millions." Her voice stayed steady as she connected one document after another. Every figure supported the next until the entire laundering network slowly appeared before Adrian's eyes. Within hours, Adrian ordered several trusted captains to gather inside the conference room. Most entered believing they would receive another security briefing about the attempted assassination. Instead, they found Charlotte sitting beside Adrian with dozens of organized financial files spread before her. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Others questioned whether she belonged in the meeting at all. Charlotte noticed every doubtful expression but refused to let it distract her. Confidence did not require loud words. It required truth. Patiently, she explained how hidden transactions flowed through shell corporations before returning to rival syndicates disguised as legal investments. Every chart she presented connected perfectly with the next. Questions that had frustrated Adrian's financial advisors for months suddenly received simple, logical answers. One veteran captain leaned forward, studying the documents with growing disbelief. Another quietly admitted that several suspicious accounts finally made sense. Respect slowly replaced skepticism. They realized Charlotte was protecting the empire in a way none of them could. Days passed, and an unexpected change spread through the Moretti family. Captains who once questioned Adrian's decision now requested Charlotte's opinion before approving major financial operations. Advisors brought reports directly to her office. Trusted accountants consulted her before authorizing transfers. She earned their loyalty not through fear but through wisdom. She listened before speaking, corrected mistakes without humiliation, and constantly reminded everyone that protecting the empire required unity instead of pride. She was not a victim. She became powerful, and the entire organization quietly recognized its new queen. Adrian noticed the transformation more than anyone. Late each evening, after the mansion finally grew quiet, they reviewed strategies together beside the fireplace. He no longer made important decisions without hearing Charlotte's perspective first. Their conversation stretched late into the night, shifting naturally from business to hopes, memories, and dreams neither had ever shared with another person. For the first time in years, Adrian felt completely safe allowing someone close enough to see the burdens carried by a king. Charlotte never tried to control him. She simply stood beside him, protecting both the man and the empire with unwavering loyalty. Every passing day strengthened the quiet bond growing between them until everyone around them understood they were no longer simply husband and wife. They had become true partners. Emma Brooks watched those changes with quiet pride. Her loyalty never wavered. She remained Charlotte's closest protector inside the mansion, carefully observing every unfamiliar servant and every suspicious whisper that drifted through the corridors. One rainy evening, while organizing newly recovered financial records, Charlotte discovered a coded payment authorized only hours earlier. Hidden inside the encrypted transaction was a single destination, a familiar warehouse where Adrian planned to inspect security operations the following morning. As Charlotte decoded the final numbers, her breath caught and her heart pounded. The payment was not financing another business deal. It was funding the next assassination, and the intended target was Adrian himself. The coded payment Charlotte uncovered changed everything. Before sunrise, Adrian quietly canceled his scheduled visit to the warehouse without explaining why. Only Charlotte, Emma, and Matteo knew the real reason. Every trusted captain received revised instructions through encrypted channels, while the Moretti Empire shifted into full defensive control. The city looked peaceful from the outside, but beneath that calm surface, fear traveled faster than traffic. Every whisper carried the possibility of betrayal, and every unexpected phone call hinted that another part of the empire had been compromised. By midday, the coordinated attacks began. One secure warehouse suddenly lost communication. Minutes later, two safe houses stopped responding to encrypted check-ins. Important business records vanished from regional offices before loyal managers could secure them. Shipping routes that had operated safely for years were unexpectedly blocked by legal inspections arranged through corrupt officials secretly working for rival families. It became painfully clear that this was not a random assault. Someone had spent months preparing to weaken Adrian's control over every important part of the empire at the same moment. Across the city, loyal soldiers moved quickly to protect Moretti businesses, trusted employees, and innocent families connected to the organization. They escorted witnesses to safer locations, secured financial offices before confidential information disappeared, and quietly evacuated neighborhoods that could become dangerous. Adrian refused to let fear dictate his decisions. Instead of reacting emotionally, he remained calm, issuing precise orders that prevented panic from spreading. Every instruction carried the same purpose: protect lives first, preserve the empire second. His captains followed without hesitation because they trusted the king even when uncertainty surrounded them. Inside the estate, Charlotte understood that the greatest threat was no longer physical. If the empire lost control of its financial network, every business Adrian had built could collapse without a single public confrontation. While attention focused on protecting properties and personnel, she quietly entered the secure archive beneath the mansion. Years of financial strategies had taught her exactly which records mattered most. She copied encrypted account files, partnership agreements, offshore investment codes, and ownership documents before transferring everything to hidden storage that only she and Adrian could access. Her calm thinking protected the foundation of the empire while others focused only on the visible crisis. She was not a victim. She became powerful by preserving the future everyone else was fighting to defend. Elsewhere in the mansion, Emma Brooks refused to abandon the household staff. Many cooks, gardeners, cleaners, and assistants had never chosen a life connected to organized crime. They were ordinary people caught inside extraordinary events. Emma organized their evacuation with remarkable composure, leading elderly workers and frightened families through emergency corridors toward secure shelters prepared years earlier for disasters. Children who barely understood the situation clung to her hands, while nervous employees followed her steady voice. Even during uncertainty, Emma created a sense of safety that eased the growing fear surrounding the estate. As evening approached, another devastating truth emerged. Intelligence reports confirmed that Vivian Moretti had officially aligned herself with the rival syndicate. She was no longer secretly influencing events from the shadows. She openly supported those determined to remove Adrian from power and replace him with leadership they could manipulate. The announcement spread through every branch of the Moretti organization like a cold wind. Veterans who had served the family for decades lowered their heads in disappointment. The greatest betrayal had not come from strangers. It had come from Adrian's own bloodline. Adrian stood silently inside the command center, studying the latest reports without speaking. Charlotte watched him closely. She recognized the sadness hidden beneath his controlled expression. He had expected rivals to challenge his authority, but he had never imagined members of his own family would willingly endanger everything generations of Morettis had built. Loyalty had always been the heart of the empire. Without it, power became meaningless. Adrian slowly closed the final report and looked toward the city skyline glowing beyond the windows. "This ends tonight," he said quietly. Before anyone could respond, emergency communications suddenly filled the command center. Multiple teams reported simultaneous movement near the city's central district, where Adrian's loyal captains had gathered to protect the empire's remaining operations. Without hesitation, Adrian left the estate to personally lead the response, refusing to send others where he would not go himself. Hours passed with only scattered updates before every communication unexpectedly went silent. One by one, encrypted signals disappeared from the monitoring screens until only complete silence remained. Charlotte's breath caught, her heart pounding as the final transmission ended abruptly. When dawn finally arrived, the king of the Moretti Empire was nowhere to be found. The silence following Adrian Moretti's disappearance spread across the city faster than any official announcement. By sunrise, rival families were already celebrating behind closed doors, convinced the king of the Moretti Empire had finally fallen. Business partners hesitated, investors delayed agreements, and whispers traveled through every major syndicate that the empire no longer had a leader. Fear settled over the organization like a heavy storm. Loyal captains struggled to hide their uncertainty, while enemies quietly prepared to divide everything Adrian had spent years building. Yet inside the Moretti estate, one person refused to believe the story unfolding around her. Charlotte stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the command center, reading every report that continued arriving from across the city. She noticed something others ignored. Adrian's encrypted emergency protocols had activated in perfect sequence before communications stopped. Supply routes remained protected, financial accounts remained locked, and loyal teams continued following instructions designed months earlier. None of it resembled a defeated king. Closing the final report, Charlotte took a slow breath. "He planned for this," she said calmly. "Until I see proof otherwise, Adrian is alive." Her steady voice silenced the fearful whispers filling the room. That afternoon, the remaining captains gathered inside the estate. Many arrived expecting confusion and arguments over succession. Instead, they found Charlotte waiting beside the enormous strategy table, every document organized, every regional report categorized, and every available resource already reassigned to protect the empire. The confidence in her eyes surprised even the oldest veterans. She did not ask them to follow her because she carried Adrian's name. She asked them to remember the loyalty that had always made the Moretti family stronger than fear. "Our enemies believe this empire survives because of one man," she told them quietly. "They're wrong. It survives because good people refuse to abandon each other when danger arrives." One by one the captains nodded. Before the meeting ended, every loyal leader pledged to stand beside their queen. The decision stunned rival syndicates. They had expected panic, hesitation, and internal conflict. Instead, Charlotte strengthened the empire's control over shipping routes, stabilized financial operations, reassured business partners, and protected employees whose livelihoods depended on Moretti companies. Her calm leadership restored confidence throughout the organization. Newspapers described unexpected stability inside the business empire, while rival families privately admitted they had underestimated the woman they once dismissed. She was not a victim. She became powerful through wisdom, patience, and unwavering loyalty. The title of queen was no longer symbolic. She had earned it. Emma Brooks continued working quietly beside Charlotte, carefully reviewing records recovered during the investigation. Late one evening, she discovered an overlooked collection of encrypted correspondence hidden within archived household communications. The messages revealed Vivian's final betrayal. Weeks before Adrian disappeared, Vivian had secretly promised rival syndicates complete access to Moretti financial networks in exchange for placing another relative on the throne. She had never intended to protect the family. She intended to control it. Emma immediately brought the evidence to Charlotte, whose heart pounded as every hidden piece finally connected. The greatest threat had never been outside the empire. It had always lived within its own bloodline. Far from the estate, in a secluded mountain retreat known only to a handful of trusted allies, Adrian quietly recovered under heavy protection. His disappearance had never been surrender. Loyal intelligence officers had intercepted credible information that enemies planned to manipulate his survival into another trap. Remaining hidden allowed him to identify every remaining traitor without exposing the people still loyal to him. Through secure reports delivered each evening, Adrian followed Charlotte's leadership from a distance. Every decision she made strengthened the empire instead of weakening it. She protected innocent families, defended loyal employees, preserved the organization's future, and inspired confidence without demanding obedience. Reading those reports, Adrian felt something deeper than admiration. His respect transformed into profound love. He had once believed he was protecting Charlotte. Now he realized she was protecting everything he had built. She was, beyond any doubt, his queen. Days later, representatives from every major mafia family assembled inside an emergency council chamber to discuss the future balance of power. Confident that Adrian was gone forever, rival leaders began negotiating how to divide Moretti territories and influence. Charlotte entered the chamber with calm dignity, refusing to surrender even while surrounded by those hoping for her downfall. Every eye remained fixed upon her as tense silence filled the room. Then, without warning, the massive council doors slowly opened. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Charlotte's breath caught, her heart pounding as every face turned toward the entrance. Standing beneath the light, calm and unshaken, Adrian Moretti walked into the Emergency Mafia Council alive. Adrian Moretti's return did not need violence to shake the entire underworld. The moment he walked into the Emergency Mafia Council alive, every rival leader understood the war had already been lost. He placed Vivian's encrypted agreements, stolen financial records, and hidden communications on the council table with cold precision. Every document exposed the betrayal clearly. No one could deny what had been planned. Vivian had sold family loyalty for control, and the rival syndicates had used her ambition to attack the empire from within. The remaining enemies tried to defend themselves with excuses, but Adrian gave them no space to twist the truth. His power came from patience, evidence, and absolute control. One by one, corrupt alliances collapsed. Business accounts were frozen, false contracts were exposed, and every hidden route used against the Moretti Empire was reclaimed. Rival families who had expected weakness now faced complete isolation. Their influence disappeared quietly, legally, and permanently. Adrian did not need to destroy the room to prove he was king. He simply revealed that he had already won. Vivian Moretti faced justice before the family she had tried to fracture. She stood inside the great hall of the estate, stripped of influence, protection, and the elegant authority she had once used to frighten servants into silence. Charlotte watched from beside Adrian, not with hatred but with calm dignity. Vivian expected rage. Instead, Charlotte gave her something far worse: refusal. Refusal to be broken. Refusal to be ashamed. Refusal to let betrayal define the future of the empire. Vivian was removed from every family trust, every business board, and every protected residence. The woman who tried to erase Charlotte from the altar became the one erased from power. Days later, the Moretti estate opened again, not for a wedding but for victory. The same halls that once carried fear now carried music, candlelight, and cautious hope. Captains arrived with their families. Loyal employees stood proudly instead of nervously. Judges, businessmen, and old allies came to witness what no rival family had believed possible. Charlotte Hayes Moretti was formally named Queen of the Moretti Empire. Not as Adrian's decoration. Not as a symbol of pity. As the woman who protected the empire when everyone thought its king had fallen. Adrian stood before them all, his voice calm but powerful enough to silence every whisper in the hall. He looked at Charlotte, then at the captains who had once doubted her. Strength was never measured by the ability to walk, he said. Strength is loyalty when betrayal is easier. Strength is wisdom under pressure. Strength is protecting others when fear tells you to protect only yourself. His gaze returned to Charlotte, and something softer entered his expression. My wife proved that better than any of us. A deep silence followed. Then one captain bowed. Another followed. Then another. Within moments, every captain in the Moretti Empire lowered his head before Charlotte. Her heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming weight of honor. She had entered this house as the bride they wanted to break. Now she sat before them as the queen they would protect, serve, and follow. Emma Brooks stood near the edge of the hall, tears shining in her eyes. She had once been a frightened maid warned to stay silent. Now Adrian called her forward in front of everyone. He rewarded her family with full medical care, gave her a permanent protected position inside the estate, and placed her under Moretti protection for life. But Charlotte gave Emma something even greater. She took her hand and whispered that loyalty had saved the empire before power ever did. Emma lowered her head, overwhelmed, knowing her courage had changed more lives than she ever imagined. As the celebration continued, Adrian approached Charlotte's wheelchair. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Charlotte looked up at him, understanding passing silently between them. He was not doing this because she needed to be carried. He was doing it because the world needed to see what honor looked like. Gently, Adrian lifted her into his arms, the same way he had on their wedding day. But this time, there was no humiliation waiting beyond the doors. There was only respect. He carried her through the center of the victory celebration while every guest watched in reverent silence. Charlotte rested close against him, her breath steady, her hand over his heart. Adrian held her as though she were the crown of the empire itself. She felt safe, not because he possessed power, but because he had chosen to protect her dignity before the entire world. She was his. He was hers. King and queen bound not by fear but by loyalty. From that night forward, the Moretti Empire changed. Fear no longer ruled every corridor. Loyalty did. Servants spoke without trembling. Captains earned trust instead of demanding it. Families under Moretti protection were treated with honor. Adrian remained powerful, but Charlotte made that power worthy of respect. Together, they built an empire stronger than the one betrayal had almost destroyed. And whenever people told the story years later, they did not remember Charlotte as the bride without a wheelchair. They remembered the queen who refused to surrender. They remembered the woman who became powerful without losing her heart. They remembered the Mafia King carrying his queen forever, not because she was weak, but because honoring her before the world became the greatest symbol of his love, his protection, and his power. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps us bring you more unforgettable mafia romance stories every week. And now tell us this. If you were Adrian, would you have chosen power or love? Or was carrying Charlotte before the world the greatest victory a king could ever claim? Share your answer in the comments. We'll be reading every one.